Using our watercolors, let's paint a beautiful scene of a sunrise over Candlewood Lake. Now, in part 1, we mixed 4 tubes of paint to create a whole slew of colors that we're going to use for this painting. So let's paint it together. First, we have to prepare our paper. I'm using Arches 140-pound cold press paper, and I'm going to tape it all the way around. The reason why we want to do that is so that we don't have any buckling, and so we have a nice white border at the end. On most of my paintings, I do a lot of drawing and I plan it all out ahead of time. This time, the only thing I need to draw, and it's very simple, are just 2 rolling hills in the distance. And that's all I'm going to have with pencil. The rest will all be in watercolor. So as you can see, we're using 4 tubes of paint. Ultramarine blue, sap green, alizarin crimson, and burnt sienna. I'm going to start by mixing my alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue to create this beautiful purple. And that's going to be in the dark clouds up ahead. And what we're going to do is add a little bit more ultramarine blue with some water and just continue that cloud all the way across, having some uneven edges so it just looks like a moving cloud. Next, I'm going to do a smaller cloud underneath with just some blue. It's almost just like a little strip across the sky. Then I'm going to add some water, because when I add water it lightens the watercolor. I'm just going to pull that color out across. Now I'm going to take burnt sienna. When you use burnt sienna straight out of the tube, it's very orange. Even though it's like a brown color, right out of the tube it's orange. So what I'm going to do is use that for the sky. Now notice I'm making a circle here, which is going to be our sun. And I'm going to leave that without putting any paint on it. That's just going to be white because the paper is white. I'm going to continue across the top of the mountains, or the top of the hills. And now I'm going to add burnt sienna with a little less water, and that'll be the cloud to the right. And so I'm just going to continue on, very uneven edges, a little bit loose. And this is going to be for our sky. Now, alizarin crimson is what I'm using, and I'm going to go under the hills, and that's going to be just the edge of the water. And I'm going to use a technique called wet on wet technique, where I'm going to put strips of color next to each other, touching each other so that they bleed into each other. So I have a wash of alizarin crimson, and now I'm going to do a wash of burnt sienna right next to each other. And instead of having a hard edge, as the clouds had up above, this is going to have a soft edge because they're bleeding into each other. I'm going to go a little darker now, so I have my alizarin crimson with just a little bit of the ultramarine mixed in. Remember, we made that wine color. So that's going to be my next row. And I'm just bringing it up on each side. But notice I'm not putting any darker colors in the center. The center of my page is going to stay light because that is going to be where the sun is reflecting on the water. So as I add darker and darker shades, so maybe here I'm going to mix a little bit of burnt sienna, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker on either side of the sun's reflection. So see how I don't go all the way across. If you do accidentally go all the way across, just take your paper towel and dab it in the center where you want the sun to be reflecting on the water. So now I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, and it's going to be a purple, and I'm going to just go on either side of the sun's reflection up close to the land. It's going to go over the alizarin crimson I had on there before and just create a nice edge. But I try to keep the center free. I'm not putting any color in the center. And I'm just going on the sides. Now I'm going a little bit darker with alizarin crimson and burnt sienna. I'm going a little darker. When I say darker, I mean a little bit less water. And I'm just brushing in there on either side, leaving out the center. So I'm going darker and darker on either side. I want it to be that color of burnt sienna because it's reflecting that cloud there. And now I'm going to go darker. I'm going to go ultramarine blue with a little bit of alizarin crimson in it to make that purple, and that's going to go across the bottom. But I'm kind of skipping over some of the white paper, letting some of the white paper show through because that will be like the tips of the waves. So now I'm going a little bit across, and it's going to be a little bit darker. I'm taking some burnt sienna and some ultramarine blue together, which made that gray, remember? And I'm going to go a little bit darker. And each brush stroke will bring me darker and darker and darker. Now really, this looks like how I'm going to complete the water, but I'm not. This is just one layer. I will be doing a whole second layer over this. So before I do that, I have to blow dry. So we're going to take out our blow dryer and lightly dry it. And the first thing you're going to notice is that when you dry watercolor with blow dryer, it dries so much lighter. So that's why I already know that I'm going to be doing 2 coats on this water. So now that that's drying, I'm going to start a little more on the sky. So the sky is not pure blue. I mixed ultramarine blue with a little bit of sap green, tiny bit, and I'm making it a wash. When I say wash, I mean I'm using a lot of water. So I have those 2 colors and I'm washing it over the sky. It's a lighter value than the clouds, and that's just light sky in the distance. Sometimes I start with this first before the clouds, but I wanted to place the clouds in a certain spot, so I did the clouds first. And now I'm just filling in the sky. Okay, a little bit more just to smooth out the edges. I want a little light water just to smooth it out. Okay. So that's going to be the sky. Not pure blue, it's kind of a darker sky, but lightened up with water. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is continue with the water. Remember how I said that we're going to do 2 coats? So we're on the 2nd coat now. And I mixed ultramarine blue with alizarin crimson and a little bit of burnt sienna because I want it very dark. So I have it like a grayish purple, almost like an indigo. Well, no, it's like a grayish purple, and I'm going to be doing some waves. So I'm just doing a couple of streaky lines across the bottom and then going up on either side. So some just lines going across the bottom here, extending from one edge to the other, but squiggly lines almost like waves. And then I'm going to slowly blend it out. And I'm going to go on either side, kind of bring it across very lightly. So I'm thinking about where these waves would be. But as I go up on the sides, I'm not going to go across the middle as much. Okay. So that looks good, but I don't want to continue right now with the water. I want to skip over to the land. So I'm going to figure out the land might have to be a couple layers too. So I want the land to be very dark in some areas because it's silhouetted. It's in silhouette. So I'm going to start with some burnt sienna, and I mixed it with ultramarine blue and a tad bit of alizarin crimson to make a very dark brown. And I'm just going across the bottom of the land and trying to keep the bottom line of the land pretty straight. Some people could use a piece of tape to straighten that line, but I'm just practicing here, so I'm going to make a line as straight as I can. And I'm going to just do the bottom part of the land. I'm dabbing out the sun a little bit because I think I went over it. And then I'm going to blow dry that blue line. I'm going to blow dry it just enough so I can go over it again and do the water near it and everything so it doesn't bleed. All right. I'm skipping up to the clouds again because I feel like they need to be darker. They are also in silhouette, and they have a lot of shadows. So I'm going with some ultramarine blue and I'm making it a little bit darker. Kind of getting this ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson mix that's a little bit purpley, a little bit gray. And I'm going right over the bottom part of my burnt sienna cloud and just darkening them up, giving them a little bit of dimension, giving them a little bit of a shadow at the bottom. Now I'm taking some alizarin crimson and that I mixed with ultramarine blue, and I'm just making this cloud a little longer because I feel like it should extend out. I want it to look like it's moving across the sky. And I'm putting the bottoms of some darker clouds up at the top. So I have ultramarine blue, burnt sienna mixture, and I'm just going to put that up at the top, kind of as if they're clouds going off the page and you're only seeing the bottom of them. All right, so now I'm looking at my clouds and I see they have very hard edges, and I want to soften the edges. Okay, so what I do is I'm going to scrub a little bit on the edges. I'm going to rinse my brush out clean, dab it on a paper towel, and so it's just a damp brush, and I'm just scrubbing out the edges. See, right there, scrubbing out the edges to make them softer. Now, if you have student grade papers, sometimes that doesn't go over as well because sometimes the paper starts to rip, so you have to be very, very careful. I'm using Arches paper, which is a very good paper for this kind of scrubbing. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to dry these clouds and dry the land so that I can go on to my next thing, which will be the land. I'm going to finish it. So I need it to be really dark because it's in silhouette. So I need to put out more ultramarine blue and mix it with burnt sienna and make it into a nice soupy consistency. And I'm going to go across the bottom of the land because that's going to be the darkest part. I'm going to go all the way across. And see, I'm doing a second coat over what I already had there with the brown at the bottom. All right, now I'm going to add a little more sap green to this mixture. So I had some sap green down here that I'm trying to pick up, but I think I'm going to have to add a little more sap green. It's sap green and ultramarine blue, but I feel like I need more because it's too much of a wash. And I need it to be thicker because I don't want it to be thick, but soupy. I need it to be soupier, not washy. So I'm adding ultramarine blue and sap green. I'm mixing it together until it's in a nice soupy consistency. And I'm going to lay that over the land. So the land it looks black here, but it actually has a little bit of green tint to it because those are the trees up on this hill. And I'm having uneven edges at the top to look like little tops of trees. So this is going to be the piece of land that is a little bit closer to me. And I'm gonna do little dabs at the top to show the tops of trees. Very typical for here in Connecticut. And you're almost seeing a little bit of shadows, but I might put some more shadows in with some dabs to show individual trees, not just the impression of individual trees or the impression of texture is what I'm doing. So that's what I'm doing with it here. I'm just dabbing in some darker color in with the green. And now I'm gonna take some of the same color, sap green and ultramarine blue, and I'm just going over the other mountain. But what I'm going to do with this one, this mountain is further away and closer to the sun, and I want it to look like it's reflecting the sunlight on the trees. So it's actually going to be an orangey mix. So it's going to be burnt sienna with a little bit of alizarin crimson, and I'm going to just go over that mountain or that hill, and it's going to look like it has the sun shining on it because it's closer to the sun. And the darker hill is in the foreground. So how can I make it look like it's in the foreground? Well, I can overlap it a little bit. So that will look like it's in the foreground. Kind of looks like just like a point, a land piece that maybe you can have a boat and go in between these two landforms. And the one on the right is closer to the sun and is having the reflection of the sun on it. That's my vision. And so I'm just doing a little bit of touch up with a very tiny brush. Maybe the brush is like a 0 or a 1. And just putting some texture on this land, a little bit of detail. And of course I have to blow dry it, which I did. I like how it's turning out so far, but remember when I said that we only did one coat on the water and that we're going to be doing a second coat? Well, that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to do an orange reflection on the water from the sun. So I'm using the burnt sienna, and it looks like I'm going way too dark, but I'm not. I'm going to do the burnt sienna, but only go halfway up until I get to the reflection from the sun. And then I'm going to drag my brush from the other side, and in the middle I'm going to leave it as a space, and that space will be the reflection of the sun on the water. And I'm going to continue with some alizarin crimson, doing the same thing, and I'm going to pull it from the other side. And since I'm doing wet on wet, the alizarin crimson and that burnt sienna kind of is bleeding into each other, which is okay. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I mixed the ultramarine blue with the sap green, more blue than green, and I'm bringing it across the bottom, leaving space in the middle, and I'm making that space farther and farther apart so it gives it perspective, so it goes back into the distance in like an upside down V, that reflection. And I'm going across the bottom now with lines, wavy lines that look like waves, and I'm making it darker and darker. So as it comes towards you, the color gets darker and darker to show atmospheric perspective. Now I'm just taking a small brush and just refining the edges to look like little waves going across, but not having this alizarin crimson go all the way across. It's just leaving that space in the middle. And I'm just refining the edges here. I am making lines to look like waves, giving it a little wave texture. And just feeling the sun and seeing how it would reflect on the water. Everybody loves the sunrise and how it looks when it's coming across the water. I love this look. So right now I'm also thinking about this area here where it got a little dark, and I'm just taking a damp brush. So I dipped it in the water, dabbed it on my paper towel, and just dragging it across the paper. It's making it look like there's waves, but it's also blending it. I don't want to fool with it too much. I find that if I feel like I made a mistake, or if I got a bloom or a dark blob, I let it fully dry and then I can fix it later, and I'll show you how I'm going to fix it later. All right, we're on to the next step. I'm mixing all of my colors together: burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and alizarin crimson, because I want something to be really dark. And I'm having actually a little more alizarin crimson, mostly alizarin crimson. And I'm going to make a tree. So I'm doing my one line up. So it's a very dark alizarin crimson because it has ultramarine blue mixed in it and it has burnt sienna mixed in it, but it's mostly alizarin crimson. And now I'm going to add more ultramarine blue to it, especially on one side, and that will give the tree the illusion that it's rounded. And I also noticed that I needed it to be darker to cover up the land that was in the background was shining through, so I had to go darker. So I'm going with some ultramarine blue over that. So I have a nice covering, and I'm going to let that dry a little bit. And while that's drying, I am going to start with some leaves. So I am mixing sap green and ultramarine blue in a very soupy consistency. And I'm going to start off with some leaves. Where am I going to start? Let me think about it for a second. Okay, so over here, I'm going to have some leaves coming down, hanging down from this tree. So it's kind of like a dark green because I used ultramarine blue and sap green mixed. And I'm going to put some coming down here. So notice my strokes for leaves. I mean, everybody does their leaves differently, but the main thing is to not be too symmetrical. We don't want to have leaves that are all the same size or going all the same direction. So each leaf is a different width, a different size. It's going to the left, then going to the right, and not symmetrical. Because if you look out at the leaves, that's how they are. They're all over the place. So I'm doing bunches of leaves hanging down from this tree. And I'm going a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Notice my brush strokes, and I'm using a round pointed brush so I can push down and flick up, push down and flick up, and I get a point, little bit of a point at the end of each leaf. So I'm pushing down very quickly, push down, pick up, push down, pick up, push down, pull, pick up, push down, pull, pick up. That's actually the stroke I'm doing. All right, now I'm going to do a branch to connect some of these leaves, and that branch is with that same color I used to make the tree. And I'm just going to pull it up, and the branch is not a straight line. It has some movement to it. It's not a completely straight line, and it's kind of hanging over. I'm doing a couple of other little branches here and there, you know, because I want it to look natural. And I observe trees all the time. I paint on location a lot, and I sit outside and study trees, and that's something I would recommend to actually paint from real trees or draw from real trees to kind of get to know how they are. They're very organic. They're not straight lines. They're not perfect circle leaves. Everything is not symmetrical. So you got to kind of get that feel. All right, what I'm doing here is I'm taking clean water and I'm just dabbing at the tree that I had already done, the trunk, just to vary up some of the consistency of the trunk. So to have some light areas and dark areas. So I just did that. Now I'm taking the tip of my brush, the tiny tip of my brush, and just dabbing a few tiny leaves. So we have some variation. So as I'm doing that, I want to talk about how even though I'm using the same colors in the leaves, look how different they look than in the land. So I used the same colors in the leaves than I did the land, but the land is even a little bit lighter than the leaves. I tried to make the leaves darker so they look like they're in the foreground. So here I'm taking my tinier brush, the one that's like a 0 or a 1, and I'm just making some smaller branches. So this tree has a couple little branches. It's a typical tree that we see around here. And I'm just going to be doing some happy little trees, as Bob Ross would say, and just enjoy myself. You know, adding some different colors. All right. So I thought I got a little bit too dark up here, and I can just dab it to lighten it up if I want. I think I want the tree to split here, so that's what I was trying to do there, but I don't know if you can even see it because of the tape. But anyway, I made some branches up at the top, and I have the tree. I'm going to make these leaves look like they come in front of the hill in the background. That also helps when you have overlapping, that helps with perspective. So the leaves look like they are really in front, and the mountain is way off in the distance. So this tree being darker and bigger, it looks like it's in the foreground, and the mountains are way in the distance. Now I'm going to put some grass or bushes, wild bushes that are growing at the bottom of this tree. And I really just wanted the tree to be grounded, set in something, look like it's on land in the foreground. So I'm just putting some bushes and leaves on the ground area here. And those are also going to be very, very dark because they're in the foreground and they are in silhouette from this beautiful sunrise. And you could be sitting under the tree, looking out at the sunrise, and that's the effect that I want to get. All right. I'm just doing some simple touch-ups on this trunk, a little bit here and there, little touch-ups on the leaves, filling in areas that I think I need to be filled in. Clean. It dried a little lighter, as you see. Always does. Now remember I said I wanted to fix this little spot in the water where there's like a dark spot. I dip my brush in water, dab it on a paper towel, and I can pick up some of that paint. So the way I did it, I found where I wanted to lighten up a line or lighten up a swatch, and I put my brush in the water, wet it, I dab it on a paper towel so it's not just straight from the water, dab it on a paper towel, and then I just try to very lightly, like you're petting a cat, very lightly. When you're petting a cat, you don't want to press too hard. It's the same thing. You're doing it very lightly. You're not pressing too hard, and you're just picking up some of the paint, and it actually is working out good because it looks like waves a little bit, because there's a little bit of texture in the waves. So that worked out okay. All right, I think I'm going to make some of these bushes a little bit darker and make the tree trunk a little darker. So I want the tree trunk to be darker on the left-hand side to make it look rounder and to make it look like it has some texture. So I'm going ahead and I'm going to darken it on one side and give it a little bit of texture. And then I'll probably darken up some of the leaves towards the top, and then maybe darken up some of the leaves that are in the grass or bushes at the bottom, just to make it much darker than what was in the background and to really make it look like it's in silhouette. All right. Well, let me take a look at it. A couple of things. I got a little marker. It's a Pigma marker. It's called Pigma, and it's waterproof. I'm just doing some very tiny branches, connecting the leaves to the other branches with thin lines. I mean, you don't have to do this, but I just thought it would be a little touch where it'll look more realistic if there's some really thin branches on the end. I'm just going to go through and do that here and there. Take a look at it. Let's take a look at it. Looks pretty good. Now, the fun part. We're going to take the tape off after we give it one last drying. So here we go. See the nice white border that you get? And it didn't buckle at all. So I'm taking the white tape off. This is white artist tape. It's a low tack tape. You can also use the blue painter's tape. Any tape that's low tack that's not going to rip your paper. That's very important. So now I think I'm done. We'll take a look at it. We used 2 tubes. We used 4 tubes of paint to do this painting, and the colors are cohesive. I would love for you to try this and post it.